He said he was relocating for work. I followed the moving truck and found out the new place already belonged to someone else. There's a peculiar calm to a life that looks good on paper. Wake at 6:45, coffee at 7:10, train at 7:38, the one that gets you to the office at a civilized 8:25 if the driver doesn't get stuck outside the tunnel again. Healthy lunches, reasonable arguments, a couch you saved for and paid off. I thought that calm meant security. It turns out it was insulation. It absorbed the small shocks until a large one hit. Ethan and I had been together 5.5 years, living together for 4. He is or was operations at a logistics firm that loves acronyms and laminated workflows. I work in content strategy for a small agency. We fell into our life with the kind of efficiency people envy and then quietly resent. The clean apartment, the double-stitched duvet, 2 toothbrushes in a cup, and 2 umbrellas by the door. He was reliable the way a spreadsheet is reliable. He checked expiration dates. He kept our warranties in a shared folder. He logged miles when we drove to see my parents. He had the steadiness that looks a lot like love, especially when you've dated men who specialized in disappearing acts. I mistook steadiness for devotion and never thought to ask if it could be decoupled. When he told me in late March that his company was restructuring and he was likely being moved to a satellite facility 2 cities away, I reacted with worry and then with project planning. That is my skill set. He had a pale look I had rarely seen on him, a practiced version of shock, and he said the word "evitable" 3 different times, which was my first sign that something was wrong because he is the kind of person who doesn't misuse words. He kept saying evitable when he meant inevitable, and I thought stress had scrambled his vocabulary. I would later learn scrambles can be strategic. We talked options. Commuting wasn't workable too far, odd warehouse hours. Remote wasn't aligned with operational realities. The company dangled a relocation stipend and a corporate apartment for 3 months while he transitioned. He suggested carefully that he take the apartment first, we keep our lease, and he come back on weekends while we decide what we wanted long term. I heard the shape of an escape plan in the sentence and flinched, then told myself not to make drama where there was logistics. He promised it would be temporary. He said the stipend would help. He told me corporate was covering the moving truck for a subset of his things so he wouldn't have to live out of bags, and that wording subset of his things should have made a noise in my head. It didn't. We picked what he'd need for 3 months. 2 suits, 3 sets of sheets. The French press he claims makes coffee taste like sincerity, half the cutlery. He insisted on taking the secondary TV because the corporate place probably has the kind of TV you can see your pores on, and he hates that. He bought new towels so he wouldn't rob our linen closet, which was a kind gesture in the way a man might be kind to a houseplant on his way out the door. He started talking about the new facility like a scout who has seen the promised land. Big bays, clean lines, new pallet jacks. He uses the kind of words about warehouses that people use about churches. I tried to be supportive even when my stomach turned. It's hard to cheer for a future that doesn't include you in its floor plan. I offered to help with logistics. He sent me a link to the corporate housing portal, and I admired wallpapers and staged couches with names like Sandstone and Urban Mist. He kept deferring the exact address of the apartment, saying, "I'll send it as soon as they finalize," and then, "They're waiting on a maintenance ticket for the door," and then, "It's the complex near the lake. There are 3 clustered together. It's messy on Google." There was always a reason to not pin it down. I documented nothing because who documents trust? I just kept adding to our shared spreadsheet, change of address forms, interim mail forwarding for packages, a reminder to rotate who feeds the fern. The moving truck came on a Tuesday. He took the day off. I moved meetings around so I could at least see him off, as if he were embarking by ship like it was 1922, and not just going to a town whose name looks familiar because you've seen it on weather maps. The crew packed. He supervised like a man who has seen too many broken lamps. The inventory list clipped to a pallet made him visibly happy. I signed for a couple of boxes we decided should stay. We ate deli sandwiches on the floor because the couch was wrapped. I was determined not to cry because the scene was already cliched enough without the soundtrack. He kissed me and said, "2 nights, you'll barely miss me." We watched the truck pull away. He was supposed to follow in his car. He stood at the window like the person you love in movies stands at the window, hands in pockets, jaw working. He turned and looked at me with a softness I have replayed too many times, kissed me again and said he'd call when he got there, then said it again when he saw that I had heard but didn't believe. I watched him drive off. I cleaned the kitchen while the apartment shuddered in that way it does after a removal, when the corners fill with a new, temporary kind of silence. I told myself the word transition like it was a prayer. He called at 7:52 that night. Traffic. Check-in took forever. The unit was fine. Nicer than the photos, a phrase that nearly made me drop the phone. He said the shower pressure was aggressive. He said he'd be back Friday. He told me to send him a photo of the fern weekly so he could see if it missed him. On Wednesday, because I am human and humans dislike being left, I felt bad enough to do something uncharacteristic. I decided to surprise him on his first morning there with breakfast and flowers. I had a late client call and figured I could leave at 5 a.m., beat traffic, drop things off, kiss him in the doorway like the bolder version of myself I kept promising to become, then drive back and make it to my desk by 10, heroic and romantic and fine. I texted him at 10 p.m. my usual goodnight. He sent back a photo of a couch covered with his jacket and a paper bag of takeout on the coffee table. It looked lived in already in the way hotel rooms can look lived in if you throw just the right things on just the right surfaces. He said, "First night down," and that was it. I set my alarm and slept badly, and at 4:30 I made thermoses and packed croissants and told myself the hours this would cost would be repaid by the smile on his face. I was 15 minutes from the address he hadn't sent me before I remembered he hadn't sent me the exact address. I called him at 6:05 a.m., and it went to voicemail. I texted, no reply. I looked up the corporate housing company and found the cluster of buildings near the lake, 3 complexes that looked like they all had an HOA and a newsletter. One of them had a photo on the front page that included a couch that looked exactly like the one in his text. I picked one, because sometimes any decision is better than none, and I turned in. The gates were open because it was early, and Amazon drivers apparently don't sleep. I parked in Visitor and felt like a trespasser and told myself this was the kind of thing couples do in the movies. The map by the leasing office showed the building numbers. Unit formats were small print. I walked. I don't need to make this part cinematic. It was simply quiet. Bird noise, the sound of professional landscaping, a distant garbage truck. I found the building that matched the shot I had seen in his text, mostly by counting the windows across and down. I felt ridiculous and also alive in a way you get when you are doing something inadvisable. The doors in this complex have those small brass plates that look like they belong on hotel rooms. I didn't know his unit. I did what I do. I kept walking. I turned a corner and found a moving truck idling in a loading zone, its driver drinking coffee out of a travel mug that looked like it had been to more states than I have. The truck was the same company as the one that left our building the day before. If you want to know what makes the hair on your arm stand up, it is the sight of the exact same logo 43 miles from your home, idling in a complex your partner didn't give you the address to. I stood and watched. It's easy to pretend to be on your phone. 2 men were rolling out a couch I recognized as ours. It wasn't ours in brand, it was ours in the way a couch gets a shape after years of 2 people and a dog that wasn't allowed up, but was allowed up. They weren't careful with it. They didn't need to be. It looked cheap on the dolly. That is the indignity of domestic things. They become humble when taken out of context. The driver checked his clipboard and shouted, cheerful in the way people are when a job is almost done, Unit 3C. I followed the dolly at a distance, my stomach doing that heavy sink it does when an elevator starts down fast. 3C had a welcome mat. It said hello in a font that has been on too many mugs. The worker backed in, grunting, and then I saw the inside because it's impossible not to look when your furniture crosses a threshold. There were pictures on the walls already. They were not his. They were not ours. The frames were the wrong color and the subjects were pretty in a way that is instantly not yours. A woman stood inside, in leggings and a sweatshirt, hair up. The kind of person you see 1,000 times in a week and never register until you are forced to mark every detail. She clapped because the couch arrived. The way people clap in sitcoms when a development occurs. Just put it over there, she said, pointing. She had a voice that says she has done customer service and survived it. I did not move. I did not breathe deep enough to be seen breathing. If it had been a short film, the camera would have pulled back to show me very small in a picture of modern moving efficiency. It wasn't a short film. It was the moment before a system maps a new reality. Ethan stepped into view from the kitchen carrying a box I recognized because I had labeled it, small appliances, in my handwriting. He looked tired. He looked happy. He had that focused dustiness men get when they are building something they want to admire later. He put the box down on the counter and leaned in to kiss the woman on the cheek. Quick, practiced. I did not scream. This surprises people. I would love to gift you an image of me banging on the door and making a scene big enough for the leasing office to record a complaint. I would love to say I let it all out in a blaze of operatic honesty. I didn't. I stood there and went very, very cold. When your system cannot process the input, it does a safe mode. I watched them argue amiably about where the couch should go. He wanted it aligned to the wall. She wanted it angled to the window. He joked about sightlines to the TV, and she flicked his shirt as if to say, fine, you win this one. My couch was their compromise prop. One of the movers asked for a signature. Ethan signed. The woman signed. The clipboard angled enough that I could see the name on the line even if I never asked for it. Madison. I did not wait to see anything else. Something in me knew enough to preserve what was left of my dignity for a place and a time when I could control the volume. I walked back to my car with my hands in the jacket pockets to keep from visibly shaking. I got in and set the breakfast bag down on the passenger seat with exaggerated care, like it contained a crystal I might drop that would change my fate. He called at 7:28. I let it ring out. He left a voicemail that started with, "Hey," and ended with, "Call me when you're up," which was extremely funny to a part of me that had developed a sense of humor I didn't recognize. I drove home behind a garbage truck that stopped every 40 yards, and it was a mercy. It gave me time to breathe in small increments. I arrived at my apartment and carried the breakfast upstairs and set it on the counter like an offering to a god I no longer believed in. I took a shower so hot my skin itched afterward. I put on a sweater I had stolen from him that suddenly seemed like contraband, and then put it in the hamper as if the machine could launder the association out. He texted at 9:12, a photo of a coffee on a balcony I could now place, captioned, "First morning." I stared at it until the edges blurred. At 9:18, he sent the address. It arrived with a line about, "Forgot I didn't give this to you, everything was frantic," and a little bullet list of parking notes. I stared at the number and felt the corridor outside 3C under my shoes again. I didn't respond. Not then. I went to work because that is what you do when someone steals the last normal morning you had. You go make another one. I wrote ad copy about a brand of cookware that pretends to be for professionals while priced for people like me. I wrote a line about heat distribution that made a junior designer clap. I almost vomited in the bathroom. He texted at noon. "How's your day?" I wrote, "Busy." He wrote, "Same." And then the thing cheaters say when they want to preserve your melt point, "Miss you." I closed my laptop and sat with my hands flat on it and counted my heartbeats to 10 and back. If you can count, you can control. That is what I had. He came home Friday as promised, as if returning on schedule could spackle over the shape of my Tuesday. He kissed me like he hadn't practiced kissing anyone else in a room I could describe room by room. He set his bag down in the exact place he always sets it, and the bag had a new scuff I knew came from a hallway I had stood in. He talked about work. He talked about the unit, the shower pressure, the view, the gentle click of the thermostat. He mentioned the leasing office woman named Tanya who runs a tight ship, a line he uses for any woman who is competent, which made me want to throw a glass into the sink. He gave me a spare fob, in case you come up spontaneously, like the kind of man who believes he is generous. That night I lay awake and mapped the floor plan of 3C under ours. I put our couch where theirs was. I put our lamp in the corner. I put my handwriting on a box on their counter and thought about the fact that Sharpie is permanent. I did not confront him that weekend. I will tell you why. You cannot cross-examine a man whose alibi is written in the language of logistics unless you bring receipts. And I had one thing, one vision, one morning's theater. I wanted more than a playbill. So I started to collect. The thing about logistics men is they document everything until the moment documenting no longer serves them. Then they switch to smoke signals. Ethan's phone habits had changed months earlier. Set face down at dinner, a new alphanumeric passcode that looked like a VIN, bathroom trips with the phone in pocket like he thought it might run away. If his phone was a fortress, the car was a bulletin board. He'd added the corporate apartment address to his Apple Maps favorites, and that, in a different month, would have made me smile. He forgot that favorites show up in CarPlay. He forgot that when you plug in a phone, the last destinations ride shotgun. Saturday morning, I offered to drive us to the farmer's market. I took the long way so the screen would rest on the home row. The address of 3C was there under a little heart he'd added. He hadn't added a heart for our address. I said nothing. That felt like a confession. Back home, I went quiet and less kind. This is a stage, and I will not dress it up. I became someone I didn't admire. I watched him move around our rooms, and I took inventory. A second toothbrush was missing from the holder, the one he insisted we keep in case we ever have guests, which we almost never did. That slot was empty like a joke about hospitality. I went through our mail and found a glossy envelope from a furniture store that wasn't ours, addressed to him, to our apartment. Inside, coupon booklets and a thank you note for a purchase recently made. The name of the salesperson was a distinctive shape. I Googled it, landed on a store in the complex I had stood in on Wednesday, and looked up the address of that store and the hours and the sale he had apparently been excited enough about to give our address instead of his temporary one. He left Sunday night with fewer pauses between his movements. The way you move when your body has already left and your shell is catching up. He kissed me in the doorway, and the kiss was distracted. It had the shape of duty. He said, 2 nights, and walked down the hall like he'd lived in the rhythm of that phrase long enough to trust it. I waited until the elevator doors closed, and then I opened the group text with my 2 best friends and typed the kind of message you don't want to see in your own bubbles. I think I know something, but I need you to talk me through the possibility I'm wrong so I can be sure when I'm right. They called. I told them the moving truck story in a voice so calm it worried me. I told them about the blue hello mat and the way you can see your handwriting on a box from 20 feet like you're reading your own diary out loud in a crowded bar. One of them said, "We could drive up there now." The other said, "We could ask Tanya who runs a tight ship." We all laughed at the same place. Humor is a handrail. We made a plan. It wasn't cinematic. It was 3 lines in a notes app. Confirm lease, Confirm deliveries, confirm occupant. I would be the person who asks the 2 earnest questions to a leasing agent who wants to be rid of me as fast as possible. One friend would call the furniture store and ask about delivery dates because her cousin lives there and can't find the receipt. The other would look up parcel locker systems and see whether initials are visible on screen. The modern world violates privacy loudly and then pretends to respect it. Monday at lunch, I walked into the leasing office wearing the face of a woman who might be moving in and needs to be sold. The receptionist was in a sweater with pumpkins on it even though it was April. She smiled like her job requires it and asked if I had an appointment. I said I didn't, but could she tell me, hypothetically, if a unit like 3C was still available for a short-term corporate stay? Because a friend of mine had just moved into something that looked like that and I wanted to be near her if I made the jump. I used the word jump, like people do when they want to imply spontaneity. She looked at her screen and then at me and said carefully that 3C was already occupied on a long lease, unfortunately, but she had a 2A coming open if I didn't mind trees and late afternoon heat. I said, oh, but I thought it was a corporate unit. She said no. She said corporate does furnished in building H. The C stack is privately leased. She said the tenant had signed last month. She said the tenant's company covered part of the deposit. Did I work for them? I almost laughed. I asked what company. She told me. It was not his. It sounded like a tech firm that sells minor miracles to mid-market businesses. I told her I love minor miracles and wrote it down like a woman who might go home and research the job board. When I asked about package lockers, she perked up. Here was a feature on her training script. She pointed to a bank of smart lockers by the wall and said, tenants get a code via email. I asked if they have names or just unit numbers, and she said just codes, because privacy. While she explained privacy, a courier walked in, scanned a tote, and set 3 packages on a counter for sorting. One had a familiar last name in bold, modest font. His. Sent to the complex, to his attention, to 3C. I felt the room tilt. I adjusted my face to neutral. I left with a brochure and a line about coming back with my boyfriend to look at 2A because the sun makes him moody, and I almost crashed into a woman in the doorway whose face I recognized from the memory of a sweatshirt and a clap. She was different in daylight, smaller, softer. A scar near her eyebrow. I didn't register on Wednesday. She apologized. I apologized, the way women do when walking through the same door. She smiled like we might get along in another life, and walked past me toward a life that had made a vacancy in mine. In the car, I braced my phone against the steering wheel and texted my friend. She called the furniture store that afternoon. She said she was checking on a delivery for her sister's unit but couldn't remember the number, only the building and the last name, and the clerk was the kind of person who either believed the best of humanity or couldn't be bothered to argue. He gave her a window. It matched Wednesday morning. He confirmed the name on the receipt and the credit card initials. They were Ethan's. He read the line items as if he were singing weather. Sofa, lamp, rugs. The rug description made me nauseous. It was a pattern I have clicked like on Instagram twice. By 5 p.m., we had a wall of small facts high enough to smell the rain. I printed none of it. Paper made it feel like a business proposition. I wanted to keep this a moral one, even if morals are what make the floor drop out from under you. That night, Ethan called at 7:16 and asked about my day. I asked about his. He talked about onboarding a new team. He said he might take a later dinner because the apartment smells like paint, a detail that was probably true. All newly staged rooms smell like solvents. He said he might crash early. He said he missed the quiet of our place. I said I missed it too. I poured a drink and sat on the floor and wrote a list in my notebook because my brain was scattered and needed a boundary. Truck, 3C, kiss, leasing office, package with his name, furniture store call, parcel lockers. The word heart next to the address in his CarPlay. The word home. Under that, I wrote one more line. Ask him when he decided to move out of our life and into another one, and whether he planned to send me a change of address card. I slept badly and woke before my alarm and hated the idea of hate as a new default setting in my body. Hate corrodes. I wanted clarity, not corrosion. If there was a version of this story where I got to keep my self-respect, it required me to stop observing and start doing. So I drove up again. There is a ridiculousness to standing in a hallway outside a door you technically have a claim to and yet do not. I timed my arrival for a window I guessed would be between his morning and his afternoon tasks. I parked on the street behind Building C so I could watch the entrance without feeling like I was watching the entrance. I brought nothing with me because I didn't want to be the woman holding a bag or a bouquet or a weapon. My hands stayed in my coat pockets out of respect for the presentable version of me that might need to appear at any second. He came out at 9:42, wearing the jacket I bought him for his last birthday. He looked like a magazine ad for competence. He checked his phone, shook his head in that tiny way he does when a schedule shifts, and then he saw me. The shock on his face was legitimate. It was like watching someone slip on black ice. His whole body made a small correction. He smiled the way you smile at a client and then let it go when he saw I was not going to help him pretend. "Hey," he said, Because what else is there to say in a hallway where everyone's mailboxes have little silver keys? Hey, I said. My voice sounded like I had taken lessons in keeping it level. Walk with me? He looked down the hall toward the door like it might generate a solution. I started walking. He followed. Outside, the day was clean and chilly and made for a fresh start. I sat on a low retaining wall that separated the carefully planned shrubs from a sidewalk designed to look casual. He stayed standing, because sitting next to me would make the scene something we had to share. Why are you here? He asked, which is a rich question given the context. You didn't give me the address, I said. You should be asking yourself why I found it anyway. He flinched at that. Flinched is the word. Men who believe in their own neatness hate when something spills. I did not preamble. I came Wednesday morning because I wanted to be a surprise, I said. I watched our couch go into 3C. I watched you sign for it. I watched you kiss her. I'm not here for a performance. I'm here to hear what version you thought I was going to believe. He looked at the shrubs like they might render a ruling. He took a breath and set his jaw, and I saw the presentation muscles align. He began with something about corporate leases and combining deliveries to streamline, and I had to hold up a hand like a traffic cop. No, I said. Try again. His mouth did the thing a mouth does when it drafts a lie and discards it because the audience has opted out. He looked smaller suddenly, which is an optical effect when the story someone tells themselves collapses in on itself. He said, "It's not what you think," and then saw my face, which must have looked like a mirror held very close, and he pivoted. It started. I don't even know when. We were just talking at work, and then we were talking more, and then I got the transfer, and it felt like I had permission to... I held up my hand again, because the word permission can make a person say something unforgivable if you let it. Answer the question I didn't ask, I said. When were you going to tell me? He did not answer. That was the answer. I let the silence sit. People will jump into silence to negotiate with themselves. He didn't. He stood there and seemed to realize simultaneously that every option available to him was a losing one. You are still going to come home on weekends, I said quietly, because sometimes saying the ugliest part is the only way to set it down. To me, to our place, with your second place already arranged like a hotel you share with someone who claps when the couch arrives. His eyes closed. When he opened them, he had chosen a path. Not honesty, not yet. Just a smaller lie that looked like accountability. I didn't plan it like this, he said. It just happened. I laughed once, a short sound that felt like stepping on a nail and walking anyway. It just happened that you leased a unit with someone and furnished it with our money? He bristled. My money. Our money, I said. We pay together. Do not pretend we don't. He looked like he wanted a referee. I refused to provide one. He began, and I stopped him with a look. Do not ask me to hate her for you, I said. That is your job. Mine is to get my life back. He had nothing for that. He did what cowards do when cornered. Tried to make logistics the villain. Moving is messy, he said. So is lying, I said. The difference is one gets scheduled. We sat with it. Cars passed. A dog peed on the shrub to my right with the untroubled dignity of a creature that acts on instinct and then moves along. I'm not going to scream here, I said finally. I'm not going to make a scene in a hallway to entertain your neighbors, but you are going to do a few things. You are going to Venmo me half of every expense related to this move that touched our accounts. You are going to remove your name from our lease within 30 days. You're going to collect your remaining things without stepping foot in our home while I'm there. And you are going to tell me, right now, if there's anything else I should know that would make me reorder how I remember the last year. He stared, startled at the precision. He should not have been. He taught me this. He tried to bargain. He asked for time. He asked if we could talk in person. I said we were talking in person. He asked for calm. I said this was calm. He looked back at the door to 3C and then at me, and I watched him choose which life to face for the next 10 minutes. There's nothing else, he said. I nodded. I didn't believe him, but I nodded because the list I had written did not require more details to be valid. I stood. Send me a bank screenshot by noon, I said. If you don't, I file a dispute on the credit card. Be grateful I'm giving you a window. He tried to touch my arm the way he used to, when we would close a conversation like gentlemen. I stepped back. He dropped his hand, suddenly aware of how the choreography had changed. I walked to my car. I did not look up at the balcony. I did not check to see if she was watching, because that would make her a participant in a story I had no intention of letting her narrate. Back home, I opened a new spreadsheet and titled it After. I itemized, deposits to be recouped, names to remove from bills, keys to exchange, passwords to rotate, the dull work of dignity. At 11:47, a payment notification landed. He sent half the moving costs, half the furniture he had purchased for that place, and a line item I hadn't expected. a lump sum with a memo that read simply rent. It did not touch what was owed, but seeing the word in his handwriting was an admission I did not know I needed. At 12:03, a text, "I'll come for my things Friday. Will you be home?" I typed back, "No." He wrote, "Do you want to see me?" I wrote, "I already have." At 12:18, a number I didn't know called. I let it go to voicemail. A woman's voice, careful and professional enough to be a message you could play in court, said, "This is Madison. I want to apologize to you. He told me it was over. I know that doesn't help. If you want to yell at someone, you can yell at me." I deleted it without saving the number. She is not my project. That afternoon, I sat on our couch and felt the shape of it differently. There is a groove where his weight was and a groove where mine is. We had been two topographies calibrated by habit. I put my palm flat and pressed until the cushion eased. Foam is resilient in ways hearts are not. I called the leasing office and asked about removing a tenant. Tanya, who runs a tight ship, explained the paperwork in a way that made me grateful for women in administrative roles everywhere. I made an appointment. I called the utilities and put them in my name. I called my sister and told her I would be missing family dinner for a while because I needed to stay near my own kitchen. On Friday, I put his clothes in boxes, folded because there is no need to maul what you're done with. I left them by the door with his name on top in marker. I left a note on the table with 2 lines: keys in the ceramic bowl, parking pass on the counter. I took my laptop and went to a coffee shop 3 blocks over and wrote copy about storage solutions, while a man who looked like him but wasn't him ordered an oat milk latte and flirted with the barista. The world insists on moving. When I came home, the bowl was lighter. The pass was gone. The boxes were gone. He'd taken the mug with a diagram of a bicycle that I bought for him the year he wanted to commute to work in weather that said don't. I stood at the door and let the space breathe. There was a prodigal quality to it, a room after a fever breaks. He texted an hour later. I left the security fob on the bookshelf. Good luck. It was a terrible sentence because it pretended we were a project that had reached beta. I replied with nothing. That night, I left the windows open because I wanted the apartment to forget the sound of his breathing. I slept for 5 straight hours, then woke and lay in the dark and let my brain play the short film again, the one where a couch crosses a threshold into a life that wasn't mine. I pressed my hand to the mattress and marked a new groove, mine now, and made a plan to move it a few inches to the left, just enough for a change in perspective. People think the story ends when you close the door behind a man and change the locks. That's the midpoint at best. The rest comes as a series of small collapses, alibis flattening into jokes you won't tell again, routines shedding their purpose, friends sorting themselves by whether they believe your version of events without needing to be convinced. He tried one more time to control the narrative. A week after he collected his things, he sent a long email with subject line, "Context. Men love context when the facts are lined up against them." He said what they all say. It wasn't planned, it happened, he didn't want to hurt me. He thought the move meant we were already moving apart. He was going to tell me when the time was right. He used the word right like it could be a calendared event. I did not respond. I created a folder in my inbox called Archive and dropped it in. I do not delete everything. Deleting suggests fear of resurrection. Archiving suggests a file in a drawer you will not open. I told our families. My mother made a noise I will hear on the day I see her lying down for the last time. She asked me if I wanted her to keep his birthday gift on top of the fridge or throw it away. I told her to do whatever felt cleanest. She threw it away. My father said nothing and then changed the subject to my tires and whether I'd rotated them. It is a generational love language. His sister texted me a paragraph that ended with, "I still love you." I typed back, "Same," and meant it while also mentally uninstalling the holidays we had planned. Mutual friends divided themselves into 3 useful categories. The ones who said, "What do you need?" The ones who said, "I can't believe it, he seemed so happy," and the ones who went professionally quiet, which is its own confession. I moved the second group out of my daily role. I kept the first close, I ignored the third. You learn who would stay in a hallway with you and who would go inside and shut the door. At work, I asked for a few days without client calls. My manager said yes and then ordered lunch for the team without making a show of it. I'm not a crier in office environments, but I spent a few minutes in a conference room with the kind of chairs that make you feel like a middle manager and let 2 tears run down my face because bodies leak under pressure valves. Then I wiped them with the heel of my hand and went back to my desk and wrote 15 variations on "We make space work smarter" for a storage client who did not know they were helping me think about my own drawers. 3 weeks later, the corporate apartment story broke entirely on its own. He texted me at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday, too late for any message that isn't an emergency, and wrote, "Don't panic if you see a charge. They messed up the billing and put the full rent on my personal card, and I need to transfer from savings." I stared at it because there are people who still think you share alarm systems after they've imported thieves into your house. I wrote back, "I don't see your accounts." He responded, "Right, then, sorry." Then nothing. The next morning, a friend sent me a screenshot of a social post I wouldn't have seen because I had muted everyone who might make me see it. Madison had posted a photo of a rug, the one I recognized from the receipt, and a caption about nesting that made me understand why people use that word with equal parts tenderness and disdain. The comments were full of hearts and future dinner invite jokes. One said, "About time the truck came," and I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee cooling to an undrinkable temperature and thought about how people who believe in new beginnings talk about trucks as if they do not carry other people's endings too. I did something I am not proud of and do not regret. I printed 2 copies of my after spreadsheet, one for me, one for a box, and drove to the facility where he worked before the transfer. I did not go inside. I sat in the parking lot and watched men who look like him and are not him carry clipboards. I watched a forklift beep like a heart monitor. I put the second copy in an envelope and wrote his name on it, and then I drove to a mailbox and put it in with no return address. It was childish theater. It made me feel better for 8 minutes. I joined a gym that has a pool because swimming is the only time I can't hear the stories my brain tells about the past and the future. Underwater is a quiet that feels earned. The rhythm is honest. Reach, pull, breathe, kick. I became the woman who is in the pool at 6:30 a.m. with the retired men who clap water off the tile like it owes them rent. One Saturday, I drove back to the lake complex. Not to stand outside 3C, but to remind my body that my legs still worked in that geography. I walked the perimeter and did not look up. I went into the leasing office with a question about their pet policy, because part of me still wanted to reclaim a narrative, and part of me wanted to gather a different fact, whether a place can hold multiple truths without collapsing. Tanya looked at me and said, "You're the woman from last time." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I hope you got what you needed." And I said, "Not from here." She nodded in a way that made me think she reads more stories than the ones in the applications. On my way out, the parcel locker beeped and a carrier loaded packages like a coin pusher machine. One box tipped and the label flashed a name I now knew far too well. The carrier nudged it back. The locker closed. The system sent a code. Life is a conveyor. Back home, I took a trash bag and walked through the apartment and put inside every object I didn't want to be asked about by my future self. The charity bin later that afternoon was delighted by my organizational urgency. I came back to rooms that held their own weight. He wrote one final time a month later, a text at a reasonable hour with an unreasonable request. "If there's any of my mail, can you bring it to me?" I typed, "Forwarded to your new home." He wrote, "Thanks." I wrote nothing. 2 weeks after that, a neighbor asked about him in the elevator. I said we'd split. She said she was sorry. Then she said, "He seemed so solid." And I said, "So do bridges that collapse." And she blinked and then nodded, and we rode down in the kind of silence that understands metaphors. I wish I could tell you I learned a lesson clean enough to embroider on something. The truth is not tidy. Here's what I have instead. If someone's story changes from we to I, with no meeting in between, believe the shift. If a moving truck arrives before a conversation, understand that someone has chosen the method of delivery for the truth, and it is not your preferred one. If a corporate apartment becomes a private home in the span of a clause, look for the contract you didn't sign. There is also this. Self-respect is paperwork. You have to file it, put your name on things, take your name off others, write lists you don't want to write, show up to the appointment with Tanya, turn your keys in, buy a new ceramic bowl for a different door. I did end up moving, not to chase him or to escape him, but because I wanted to see sunlight in a room without remembering where his shoes used to sit. My new place is smaller and faces a street that is louder. It has a secondhand table with a scratch I did not cause. It has a hook by the door with one set of keys on it and a bowl on the counter with nothing in it yet. I bought a rug and did not ask anyone to clap when it arrived. I put my couch against the wall because I like sightlines too. Sometimes I drive past the lake on purpose, not to look up, but to confirm that geography did not change just because a story did. The buildings are still beige, the parcel locker still beeps, trash day still happens on Tuesdays. Somewhere on a bookshelf in 3C, a security fob sits where he left it in another life. That's fine. My doors have different locks. People love a clean arc. They want the betrayal, confrontation, break, rebuild, and a closing line that sounds like a thesis. My life did not do that neatness for me, but I can tell you the long version. The kind that happens after friends stop checking in twice a day and the utilities are all in your name. Grief comes like weather. It is not a moral judgment. Some mornings I wake with a brick on my chest and make coffee around it. Other mornings I feel nothing at all and worry that the nothing is a new symptom of a person I didn't mean to become. I would prefer a steady drizzle to the sudden storms. I accept what arrives, mop what I can, stand under the parts of my roof that no longer leak. I stopped replaying the hallway scene, not because time heals like slogans claim, but because repetition dulls sharp things, and I want my knives to be useful for cooking, not cutting me open every day. I trained my brain to swap that sequence for another one, me at the leasing desk. asking what it would cost to live in a place by myself and being told a sum I could afford if I chose to. That is a better movie to watch when you have dishes to do. I kept my job because leaving it would have made me feel like I was listing too far in the same direction. I asked for and received bigger projects. I wrote a brand book for a client whose founder built shelving for people who felt like their lives didn't fit in the spaces they had. I thought about writing him a thank you note for creating the metaphor I needed, and decided that would be a bridge too far for a copywriter who cried once in his office reading the testimonies. I made new friends I didn't have to share. You don't realize how much of your social architecture is joint custody until you pick up the pieces alone and notice how many were glued to his on the underside. I went to a book club and didn't pretend to have read the book. I went hiking with a group who like fog and each other in equal measure. I let a stranger's dog put his head in my lap and did not make a note of his owner's phone number. I called a therapist who talks like a librarian and has art on her walls that I recognized from a museum gift shop. We talked about betrayal, yes, but more about habit and how it becomes a kind of religion if you pray to it long enough. We examined the liturgy of my mornings and noted where I could change the readings. On the day I realized I was pouring 2 coffees anyway, we made a plan for better muscle memory. My mother sent me a card every Sunday for a month, all flowers and hopeful script, all different brands. She has a drawer of cards bought on sale for a decade's worth of friends. On the last one, she wrote, "You are not abandoned by the good things." I kept that one on my fridge. Sometimes when the apartment is very quiet at night, I read it out loud to the fern I still send him no photos of. I did eventually receive mail for him at my address. I sent it back. Write in, "Return to sender." Not as a performative move, but because I don't accept packages for people who don't live here. One envelope was from a bank with a rate offer in it. I laughed and tossed it in the bin. The other was a bland notice from a medical provider about a missed appointment. I thought about how humans miss things they should attend to, and whether the universe was bored or cruel. About 6 months in, he texted me on a Monday at 2:03 p.m. to say his aunt had died and she always liked me and he thought I should know. I wrote back 2 lines. "I'm sorry, she did." He said thank you. It didn't unravel me. It didn't fix anything. It was a weather pattern. A cloud passed, and I watched it without chasing shade. I ran into Madison once at a farmer's market, the other one, not our joint one. And yes, that's how my brain labeled it, and we did the thing women do when a man has put them on opposite sides of a cheaply built bridge. We made eye contact. She looked like a person who had learned something at cost. She said, "Hi," and I said, "Hi," and she said, "This is strange," and I said, "Yes," and she said, "He told me," and I said, "I didn't ask," and she nodded, and we stood there until the conversation ended with a mercy nod. We did not apologize to each other. We did not become allies. We stepped out of each other's way. It was a relief. The moving truck company sent me a request for a review because the world is algorithmic and indifferent. I stared at the 5 empty stars and closed the tab. Review culture smooths too much. I refuse to compress the narrative to a rating and a sentence. I wrote the sentence in my head anyway. They were prompt, they were efficient, they delivered my furniture to the wrong life. A year later, my lease was up and I had to decide whether to renew. The landlord sent a number that made me cough and then offered a smaller number if I signed that week, the way they do. I walked the neighborhood and counted the trees that made me honest about why I was staying. I signed for 6 more months because I'm allowed to be slow. I replaced the fern because it died one random Tuesday and grief comes like weather. Here's what I can put at the end. Not a lesson so much as a procedure you may use if you need it. When a person tries to relocate without telling you they are moving out of your life, you are allowed to stay where you are and change the furniture. You're allowed to stand in a hallway and not knock. You're allowed to demand receipts and then decide you don't need them to know the truth. You're allowed to run a finger over the grooves in a couch and claim all of them for yourself. You are allowed to make a list called after and check off items in any order that keeps you from cracking. If a moving truck appears on your street and your name is on fewer boxes than you thought, you are allowed to write your name on bigger ones later. And if you find yourself sitting in your car outside a building with brass numbers on the doors and a mat that says, "Hello," you are allowed to say goodbye without letting anyone else hear it.